Hello, my name's Greg Pierre. I'm the CEO of the Association for Art History, and I'm here to welcome you to our inaugural Art History Festival. This will comprise a series of programs over the next week, Monday through Thursday evenings online, and then Friday evening and Saturday in person at the National Gallery. We were inspired to create this festival, the only one of its kind in the UK, to celebrate and share our subject with anyone who has an interest in art, design, or architecture, and who wants to deepen those interests through art history. Or more specifically, through the questions that we ask in this field: how and why a work of art was made, what was its meaning when it was created, and whether that meaning has changed over time. The answers to these questions help us to interpret and understand the visual and material worlds around us, not just works of art, but also buildings, any designed object, and even public spaces. And they also give us an insight into our own and others' cultures, past and present, and from all parts of the world. Over the course of the next week, speakers at the festival will be thinking about these essential questions from a variety of perspectives when considering topics such as the aesthetics and poetics of geological formations, neglected artists during the apartheid era, Louis Khan's architecture in Pakistan, women artists who were activists in Northern Ireland, and the nature of art museums in contemporary culture. We hope that there is something for all tastes and interests in this festival, and we're grateful to all of our speakers and partners who will be participating in it this week. Our partners for the festival are the National Gallery, the Design History Society, the Art Newspaper, the Italian Cultural Institute in London, and Curzon, who are putting a number of art history-related films online during the month of September in conjunction with the festival. I want to thank those at the Association for Art History for their work in helping to realize this ambitious program. Thank you to Lisa Howard, the festival manager, our former employee, Claire Davis, Kara Kazanov, and Trevor Horsewood. We all hope that you'll enjoy the program this coming week, starting with a conversation with conceptual artist Ilana Halperin, that's organized by the Scottish Society for Art History. With that, I'll turn you over to my colleague, the Society's chair, Claire Robinson.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Felt Events, Ilana Halperin in conversation with Katrina McCara from Contributors, which is organised by the Scottish Society for Art History in association with the Museums of the University of St Andrews. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for this session. New York-born artist Ilana Halperin is based between Glasgow and the Isle of Bute. For over 20 years, Ilana's work has focused on articulating new ways of cultivating our understanding of and relationship with our fragile ecological world. Her work helps us to imagine ourselves as part of the deep time story. She combines fieldwork in diverse locations, on volcanoes in Hawaii, caves in France, geothermal springs in Japan, and museums, archives, and laboratories with an active studio-based practice. She's worked with organisations such as the Smithsonian Institution, British Geological Survey, Earthwatch, and National Museum Scotland. And her work has featured in solo exhibitions worldwide, including Mount Stewart, Isle of Bute, Manchester Museum, and the Natural History Museum in Yamaguchi, Japan. Ilana's the Library of Earth Anatomy Permanent Commission at the Curatorial in San Francisco opened in 2017. Her solo exhibition, Minerals of New York, opened at Leeds Arts University and toured to the Hunterian in Glasgow in 2019. Ilana is currently working with the Museums of the University of St Andrews on an artist residency funded by the Harry and Marjorie Boswell Fund. Dr. Katrina McCara is Assistant Director, Heritage Collections and Curation at the University of St Andrews. She's editor of the forthcoming publication for Felt Events, which surveys 2 decades of Ilana Halperin's conceptual art practice. Katrina curated the exhibition Ilana Halperin, Minerals of New York at Leeds Arts University. Noel Kumabon is a freelance curator based in Oban who was born and raised in Japan. And informed by a lived experience as an immigrant and ethnic minority, Noel's curatorial practice aims to weave relationships among differences. Recent work includes the exhibition Ilana Halperin, the Rock Cycle Yamaguchi, which is planned for autumn 2022 at the Pierre Art Centre in Orkney. Welcome, Ilana, Katrina, and Noel. Next up, we have a performative reading by Ilana.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to join you for the Art History Festival. I would like to thank Katrina, Naoko, Claire, the SSAH, the Museums of the University of St. Andrews, and the AAH. Then, thank you all for joining us today. I will be reading excerpts from two of my texts in Felt events, which act as bookends within a section entitled Core Sample of Collected Writings. All of the images are drawn from the book as a little preview. Felt events. The story of how I came to Beppu began a very long time ago, almost half my life ago, in New York, when I was walking down the street, downtown, across from Cooper Union, near the now unrecognizable Bowery. There was a man selling old books on the sidewalk, laid out on a sheet. One caught my attention, a book called Volcano, about volcanoes from around the world. There were volcanoes from Iceland, Hawaii, Italy, Scotland. In retrospect, every project I have ever undertaken can be traced to a picture in this book, but that is a story for another time. It was here, in the book, that I saw Staffa and Beppu for the first time. Two sides of a volcanic coin, one extinct, one entirely alive. Bloody Pond Hell. On March 14th, 2014, at 2 in the morning, I was awoken by a 6.3 magnitude earthquake in Beppu, Japan. I was living above the equivalent of Yellowstone in the heart of the tsunami evacuation flood zone. Fortunately, everything was fine. How this moment relates to the present one can be traced to a body of work I made 14 years ago entitled Felt Events, the term seismologists use to refer to earthquakes. Obsessed with small seismic shifts, I was spending time at the British Geological Survey, poring over their catalog of British earthquakes. Felt Events, 1999. The house moved sideways. The ironing board in the kitchen fell over. Two pictures moved. The house shook slightly. The walls seemed affected. Windows, perfume bottles, cosmetics, cups. Apples fell from trees. The ceiling lamp swung. The wardrobes were collapsing. The bed moved. The room shook twice. A porcelain jug inside a china dish rattled. The bedroom door opened, then shutters. A sense of dropping as in a lift. I was aware something had moved. Birds were singing loudly. The bedroom faces east. The building moved. Milk from a small jug spilt onto a tray. Objects were dislodged from stacks. A noise like moving thunder. A train going underneath the house. A mini tornado building to a crescendo and then falling back, a shower of fine particles. The hangers on the door were clinking together like a chandelier. Indoors, bedroom, top floor, only radiators rattling. Unable to describe the sensations, birds gave alarm calls. Floorboards were moving. The house sank and then rocked. Curtains fell down. Objects on shelves were closer to the edge. A chair lifted. How can I describe it as the sound of a plane before crashing? I am fairly sure I was not dreaming, and the only way I can begin to describe the incident in my own mind is that it was some sort of tremor. And then it passed. Was that a bomb going off? Was that a plane taking off? Was that thunder, a bomb in the distance, a distant train? Sleeping, lying, awoken by a vibrating house, mattress on floor. Magnitude 6.1, Ionada, this earthquake poses no tsunami risk. 2:07 Japan Standard Time, also magnitude 6.3, 15 kilometers northeast of Kunisaki-shi, Japan. Woke up, thought train was running overhead, that I live below a train tunnel like the arches in the Brooklyn Bridge. I remember waking up from a deep, deep dream thinking, how strange it is to live in a train tunnel. I don't recall living in a train tunnel. I do not live in a train tunnel. This is an earthquake. The sound was very loud, deafening, shaking glass in rickety windows. Even when a car drives by, the windows shake. But this is different. It was the ground moving, house was shaking, floor and rattling, very loud rattling. I am still shaking like a leaf, scared. Opened window, lean out window, look both ways, down the street. Across from me, lights have gone on. Now thinking maybe they check the TV for warning, but I have no radio, no TV, don't understand Japanese. I got dressed, took out my passport. We'll make an evacuation bag, like Samara explained, they always have waiting by the door in Oakland. Made me realize if there is a larger earthquake, I do not know where to go. Outside, sirens go off at regular intervals. Announcements on a loudspeaker boom from police cars. They say something over and over again. I have no idea what they are saying. Are they asking us to evacuate? Is there a tsunami warning? Aftershocks expected? I was asleep, awoken by my house, moving, futon on floor. When I get home, I take out my volcano book. Staffa is there, Heme, Big Island, Stromboli, all of the places I have gone to meet volcanoes, to understand what it means to be human and rock and both at the same time. I check the index of volcano and discover, though I have read and looked at this book 1 million times before, that it is by William Melson, the volcanologist who recorded the sounds of the Arenal volcano erupting for over 40 years. And it was William Melson who, in 2006, at the Center for Short-Lived Phenomena, explained the nature of love to me when talking about volcanoes. He said, you love what you get to know, what you pay attention to, and therefore become more aware of. This is not a passive form of love. This is how I feel about Arenal. Now, after 40 years, I don't need to see the volcano to know that I love it. Just as I don't need to see my daughters often to know that I love them. Just to know that they are there and happy and doing as they should is enough. My Conglomerate Family, May 1st, 2020. A conglomerate is a sedimentary rock composed of many different kinds of rock naturally bound together. A family, just like a rock, can be composed of many parts. I've always thought and felt that in death and raw catastrophe, there is no place for metaphor. A small volcanic eruption like the nightly displays of lava which appear as the sun sets on the island of Stromboli are often likened to a coffee percolator, as the eruptions are so harmless and predictable. It is known as the lighthouse of the Mediterranean for its daily beacon of molten red. But when Mount Pelée erupted in 1903, within minutes, 28,000 people died in the city of Saint-Pierre on the island of Martinique. In this, what language is useful? Only incomprehensible grief, memorials after the catastrophe, and, if appropriate, reflection on the reason for mass death. In that case, namely, that though the volcano was increasingly violent and erratic in the days leading up to the eruption, local politicians refused to let people evacuate from the island due to upcoming elections they hoped to win. There were only 3 survivors of the eruption in Saint-Pierre: a cobbler, a convict saved by the thick walls of his cell, and a young girl. Around the world, the potentially catastrophic eruption of the virus had been rumbling and worse for months. Wuhan, Lombardy, Tokyo Bay, Washington State, off the coast of California, Madrid, New Rochelle, New York, London, countless simultaneous tremors signaling a violent eruption was coming closer. With one ear to the ground, listening to this seismic horror unfold, I feel rage. Adrenaline courses through my veins. It pumps through my body like liquid fire. One government after another, ignoring the signs, ignoring the tsunami of death that has traveled incrementally across the surface of the earth as easily as day shifting to night. As easily as flying across the Atlantic into summer daybreak, where the sunrise extends for hours. But this is not beautiful like a sunrise. This is monstrous, needless mass death. I read a very helpful article that said during the first few weeks of a lockdown, it is okay if your mind doesn't work. If you can't think, can't be productive, can only focus on very simple tasks. This is because the world has changed, that everything is now different. It explains during this period of adjustment, you may find you can only focus on doing everything you can to secure the safety and health of everyone you love, and that once their safety and security are in place, that you will be surprised to find that your mind slowly comes back to life, becomes more capable of complex thoughts and responses. I keep trying to find the right words, how to articulate something so horrific. A few doors down, a pediatric doctor is sick at home. In a retirement home up the block, people are dying. My brother-in-law is a carer and has been told he can't bring masks to work because they are not approved, but no other masks are provided. Across the ocean, my younger sister is indefinitely locked in her apartment in Brooklyn. Near my elementary school on the field in Central Park, where we had our annual field day, there is now a field hospital run by homophobic zealots. and my mother in Maine, who is totally dependent on a small team of carers, is in the middle of a deep health crisis, very far from me. Is that why in my mind, I keep ending up in the corner of the living room where I grew up, sitting on the floor by my parents' record player? Dappled light filters through the window. Vivid green shoots and plants with boughs fill the windowsill. Planters crowd the floor. I am playing my parents' records. Janis Joplin, Simon and Garfunkel, Joni Mitchell. But the record that is on is scratched. It keeps jumping back to the same place. Not safe, not safe, not safe. One piece I made for a show that would have opened this week is called My Conglomerate Family. It is a watercolor of a collection of rocks. Each rock is a stand-in for someone that is part of my family by choice. Then, when I made it, before the pandemic, I had been imagining and trying to conjure more expansive ways of thinking about my own family, from very deep time family lines drawn in the calcium carbonate of our teeth and bones to the more immediate alternative families based not only on blood, but on how we choose each other, how we love each other, who and how we support one another. Conglomerates held together by feeling. And now, in some ways, we are part of an international conglomerate, intrinsically bound together by the virus, invisible glue holding everyone together in a shared catastrophe. I hope we can be bound together by our urgent sense of humanity. Thank you.
Good evening from St Andrews. And thank you, Ilana, for preparing those exquisitely beautiful and very poignant readings. It's always such a treat to witness your performance lectures, and many of the scripts for these lectures will appear in the forthcoming book project we've been working on with Strange Attractor Press and MIT, which is due for publication in December, entitled Felt Events. A felt event could be described as a somatic encounter. It is a term used by seismologists in their recording of the everyday tremors and trembles which occur all over the Earth's surface. Some felt events are catastrophic, measuring high on the Richter magnitude scale, but the majority tend to go relatively undetected by the public at large, minor tremors that are experienced only by the most sensitive, what surrealists might have termed a marvelous poetics within the everyday. Felt Events, the volume, offers the first substantial academic inquiry into Ilana's conceptual practice to date, representing a mid-career moment of reflection and surveying the last 2 decades of her output, all the way through from her postgraduate years at the Glasgow School of Art in the late 90s to her more recent work that responds to a major felt event of our time, the global COVID-19 pandemic. And this book is very much a product of lockdown and the kind of slow burn incremental scholarship that tends to cluster and shimmer around Ilana's work. A key aim of this collection is to introduce her output to new generations of artists, writers, students, and environmental activists, to those who will shape the critical landscapes of the 21st century. Felt Events follows Andrew Patrizio's recent call for a dark green art history, one that seeks to collaborate with other disciplines concerned with eco-criticism in an effort to pool expertise and resources. As David Ferrier shows us in Anthropocene Poetics 2019, we can use Ilana's practice as a starting point into timely discussions around eco-criticism and intersectional queer ecologies, which disrupt heteronormative binary thinking. And such concerns can be found to percolate all the way through Ilana's work, including her ongoing responses to art historical touchstones. While on the one hand, she may be seen as an inheritor of late 60s and early 70s earthworks or environmental art, describing Robert Smithson's essay A Sedimentation of the Mind of 1968 as an early revelation. On the other, Ilana offers a necessary paradigm shift. The poet and cultural theorist Susan Stewart has long advised that we approach the gigantic heroism of land art with a generous helping of irony over sublimity, arguing that the monumental can only create distance. Ilana, meanwhile, works through the implications of this canon by offering a quieter, feminist revision that embraces the implicit and the intimate possibilities of such landscapes. And tonight we're going to hear more about such geologic intimacy. I think of this book as one of her mica libraries. Ilana imagines a library composed only of rocks and minerals, every layer another narrative. The book is structured in 3 main sections, with contributions from 2 art historians, Andrew Patrizio and Dominic Pattison, an anthropologist, Jerry Z, a writer, Nicola White, and international curators, Lisa Lefebvre, and our very own Nauko Mabon, who joins us this evening and is going to tell us a little bit more now about her contribution to the volume and about her long-term curatorial engagement with Ilana's work. Nauko, a very warm welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. That's the wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody in this room. First of all, thank you very much, Ilana and Katrina, for giving me an opportunity to be part of this wonderful field event. And also to Claire, Matthew, Lily, as well as Ilana and Katrina, Scottish Society for Art History, the Museum of the University of St. Andrews, for inviting me today. I'm really honored to be here with you all. I first met Ilana in 2014. There was a network event in Glasgow, and I decided to join partially because I saw Ilana's name in the list of invited guests. And at the time, my memory of encountering Ilana's work for the first time in her solo exhibition at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh was still very vivid. So I was hoping to meet her. And I managed to speak to Ilana and discover that he had just returned from my hometown called Fukuoka for a 3-week research residency in Beppu. And both Beppu and Fukuoka are on the same island called Kyushu. After that, to date, we have collaboratively made 2 cross-disciplinary projects between Scotland and Japan, exploring the interface across visual art and natural science. The first project was Geologic Intimacy Yunohana in 2015 to 17 between Beppu and Aberdeen. Beppu is the 2nd largest geothermal center on Earth, after Yellowstone in the United States, and it's best known for many onsen hot spring spas, as you might probably know. This is linked to how Kyushu Island is active for its volcanic activities. So 2 most well-known Kyushu volcanoes are Mount Aso in Kumamoto and Sakurajima in Kagoshima. And Sakurajima erupts a few times a day on average, so very, very active. We developed this project between building on Ilana's research and experiment already done in the area to primarily see the potential of making new geothermal sculptures with mineral-rich water of Beppu. We worked with 5 different partners, like hotels and public bathhouses, who have onsen sources in Kannawa area. Ilana's ceramic and Scottish red sandstone objects were installed under or in the water, and we monitored them from Scotland through Japanese colleagues' occasional photo reports. Over the 12-month formation period, objects slowly became encrusted in new mineral deposits. The resulting new geothermal sculptures were exhibited in Japanese room of Fujiya Gallery in Kanawa, which is a former traditional ryokan built in 1899. And back in Scotland, we made a Scottish exhibition with Peacock Visual Art in Aberdeen, which is another location with a deep geologic and Japanese connection, actually. Ilana was commissioned to make a series of new prints. So in Beppu, we collected hot spring minerals to make field pigment. To pair with this idea, we sought Scottish minerals, and we visited the National Soils Archive at the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. And towards the end of our meeting, the principal soil scientist there, Dr. Alan Lilly, nearly gave us a heart attack by generously gifting 4 soils from a core sample sourced at Sly Houses Farm near the Scottish borders, where James Hutton himself farmed and lived. And James Hutton is the 18th century Scottish geologist and farmer known as the father of modern geology for formulating radical ideas about the age of the earth and deep geologic time. We developed a series of prints using those incredible materials to accompany the new geothermal sculptures made in Beppu. The second project, which is ongoing, is the Rock Cycle Yamaguchi between Yamaguchi and Orkney. It was launched in early 2019 after Ilana's 2-week residency and 2-week research residency at Akiyoshida International Art Village in 2018. Yamaguchi is known for its geological significance, notably through Akiyoshida, which is the highest concentration of karst formation in Japan, and Akiyoshido, which is nation's largest and longest limestone cave. Both are located in an area designated as a Koshi National Park. The project drew inspiration from the geological rock cycle, which is a concept in geology describing how rocks change from one type to another through deep geologic time amongst the three main rock types, sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous. There are 3 chapters in the project, and each chapter conceptually represents different stages within the cycle. Through research and outreach activities hosted by Yamaguchi University, Ilana has developed a new body of work utilizing materials and narrative unique to Yamaguchi, culminating in 3 parallel solo exhibitions in 2019 in Yamaguchi, including Akiyoshida Museum of Natural History. The Scottish exhibition at the Pierre Art Centre in Orkney was originally planned in 2020, featuring Ilana's new works in conversation with thematically resonant work by Yamaguchi-based artist Yoshihisa Nakano and Keijiro Suzuki. It was, of course, postponed, but it's rescheduled and planned to be open in early September next year. So that's great. Making these projects has been a lengthy and quite complex journey involving many stages, encounters, and learnings. And it feels like the form of our collaboration is transforming endlessly, just like a rock. So when I was invited to contribute to the failed event, in a way to summarize our journey to date, I employed the format of diary or travel log with date, starting from the point Ilana and myself were born. This is to make our journey just open-ended and still on its way. And this format was also inspired by how Ilana embodies both geologic and personal time and event. which is, for instance, apparent in her drawings, such as the timeline drawing of Eldfell volcano and herself. Another thing I employed for my contribution was addressing myself as the third person rather than me or I. And this is because I wanted to see myself from a slightly detached place as just one component of this slow and long-term process of collaboration. And because the project involved so many collaborators, both human and more than human collaborators, I try to avoid sounding as if I'm the author or the boss, because I'm not. In this journey, I'm more like a curator in a strong sense of agent who mediates and makes relationship between differences. Just resonating with the conglomerate family Ilana mentioned, while tracing back the trajectory of our collaborations to date, I came to imagine ourselves as pieces of pebbles. The pebbles flow and immigrate. They meet and form new geology. While experiencing various frictions and cooperative phenomena and activities, over time, the pebbles will become intimately related. Rather than broad social status, origin of nation, skin color, or faith, they will become an international conglomerate bound by each other and community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Naoko. Amazing to see so many behind the scenes images from your collaborative practice. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, as you can imagine that it was quite a tough decision which image should go into the presentation. It's always difficult.
I've got two questions for you just to kick us off. Naoko, specifically first, just to get us started, there are many artists working in the contemporary art scene in Scotland at the moment. What made you first want to collaborate with Ilana specifically?
That is, if I can say, please correct me, Ilana, but that happened quite naturally, I have to say. I was a fan of Ilana, of course, and I'm glad that I learned to Ilana to say hello at the event. But that was naturally, collaboration naturally started. And one thing, I guess that triggered me or made me feel that I want to learn more from her practice is that I felt that especially the exhibition, the library at the National Museum of Scotland in 2013, that was probably the first time for me to come across artwork made out of the collaboration with science, but not only representing science, if you know what I mean. It was more than only the visual representation. It was more like an active form or even like fluid form to question and suggest thinking differently about scientific phenomena. So that was I guess that if I think back, that was the kind of huge trigger for me to made me feel that want to learn more about Ilana's practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Same but different. It's a really great way of helping us think in other ways.
Yeah.
And you describe your approach as being like an agent. And you also use the third person narrative in your chapter for felt events. Can you tell us a little bit more about the choice of the logbook format? Does this relate to field diaries or a kind of history of natural science documentation?
Yeah.
Are you getting into the mind of a natural scientist?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. And I think simple answer is that the logbook style was useful when I kind of think back what we've done in our collaboration, because it's a universal form. So beyond the language or beyond the knowledge in visual art or science, you kind of know that if that's chronologically ordered and it's a kind of logbook style, then you can kind of get that what's this about, like date and then what happened and then how this journey is developing. So I thought that that's quite useful format. I can talk more, but while collaborating with scientists, sometimes I recognize that they use different way to document or to write things. And then sometimes we don't care about some certain information, but they really care about or very important information. For instance, date or temperature and things like that. So that was quite inspiring as well.
I was going to ask you about this actually. I should reiterate, first of all, that Ilana is currently doing an artist residency with us at the University of St Andrews for the Boswell collection. And one of the joys of that project is being able to kind of collaborate with the earth scientists. So I wonder if I can bring Ilana into the conversation at this point, actually, and ask if you have any kind of tips for artists or art historians who may be in the audience who might want to work with scientists. What have been your experiences as artists and curators?
Yes. Well, I think one thing that has been crucial right from the very beginning is meeting as humans, and rather than thinking of discipline, thinking about the things that we have in common. So often when I have started working with scientists or someone from another specialization, it's very conversational and very rooted in lived experiences and locating lived experiences that we might share. And so rather than saying, right, you're from this discipline, I'm from this discipline, we have nothing in common, we think differently, we're looking for different things, we have different ways of thinking. I found often that early on in conversations, things like, how did you come into the field that you're working in? Often these sort of hidden routes or trajectories, or thinking about Naoko's, in a way, talking about this kind of moving stream or kind of accumulation of experiences. Often those experiences occur when you're very young and not pre-language, but through a kind of deep love of something that then over time develops and finds a way to become articulated, perhaps through an advanced discipline, whether it's art, science, or anything else. So what I found is often these conversations really grow in first locating, and the collaborations grow out of locating those things that we share together, like a love of being outside, or why a volcano, or what does it feel like, or what is your first memory, and using that as a building block rather than, well, I should say, which I think is crucial as well, going in to sort of extract information that you then use. So a little bit, when Naoko mentioned that even in that first experience at National Museums for the library exhibition, that you were struck by the way that the work was non-illustrative, I think that's a really embedded, important approach within my practice, which is rather than using art to illustrate, using or working with art and science as shared languages that find their ways in and through each other, where together we can help unpick and uncover shared ways of understanding the world. And so rather than my work being used to illustrate within a scientific publication, for example, what happens when instead we look for this shared approach to looking into the world, and the way that manifests might look really, really different. But that's at the root of it.
Yeah, it's such a great model thought, I think, for people to look at. Obviously, there's a big emphasis on process in your practice. And we saw that looking at some of Nauko's slideshow, you at work, so almost the process being as important as the end result. I saw quite a number of geothermal sculptures in that presentation, and I wondered if you could just talk us through what those are and how those come into being.
Yes, so the geothermal sculptures are part of an ongoing body of work, which is called physical geology. And I would say starting in 2008, I began collaborating with people in different locations around the world who were already living and working in environments where there was an active, accumulating geological process where we could witness geological formation within a human sense of time. So rather than thinking about geological process and time as something that happens only outside of the comprehension of our own life, a process that accumulates very quickly, which one might initially think, well, that's not really common within a geological time context. Geology forms in deep, deep time, hundreds of millions of years, timelines that are completely incomprehensible. And so from encountering an object that was formed in a very high velocity calcifying spring in France in a place called the Fontaine Petrifying de Saint-Nectaire, I began my first collaboration at that instance with the Fontaine, and we've worked together ever since, growing geological sculptures, or we could call it culturally occurring geology. Geological sculptures. There's lots of different ways I think that we can describe what that is. Cultural landmass, migratory cultural landmass, or immigrant rocks that form through culture and geological process hand in hand. And so in that instance, we grew a series of sculptures in the cave over 10 months. And from that experience, I began thinking about other places where we could also witness geological processes happening within a human sense of time, a day, a week, a month, a few months, a year. So an amount of time that would be comprehensible as a significant moment or period of change within your own lifespan. And so Naoko and I have worked in multiple sites at this point in both Yamaguchi and in Beppu and Kanoa, and other areas around Beppu, where you could witness very high velocity geothermal processes of formation, we could say at the surface. So you can almost stand and watch something forming before your eyes. And so we had the pleasure and honor of working with different people who knew these water sources very, very well. And in a very practical way, it meant you can imagine each site or phenomena forms in its own way. It has its own personality. It forms its own kind of deposit. And so first there's a period of observation, trying to get to know that phenomena well before thinking what might make sense to immerse in this spring or this source. So there's a period of observation, and then eventually coming to a set of choices and decisions around putting objects into these springs over a period of time so that natural deposits form, we could say, over the skeleton or the armature. And a key part of that is really deep collaboration, both in person, but also at a great distance, where through building trust with our collaborators, they become the keepers and the facilitators of the sculptures in partnership with the natural phenomena. And so this was what we went through in Beppu and also in Kibetani Onsen, where we were working with Tanaka Sensei and people at Matsunoyu, a very ancient spring, where we made sculptures for the project in Yamaguchi. And we could say, again, the same in Beppu with our different collaborators, where we selected, chose, immersed, and then handed the process over to say, let's talk and see how these things develop. And so then we had a very intense correspondence, photo reports. Should we turn the sculpture red? Is it yet the sculpture yet? Is it ready? Should we bring it out of the water? Do we need to put it back in? This sculpture, we could say, failed, or didn't form. It only formed in mud and then it melted away. What do we do? How do we decide? And so this was a very much collaborative group process, group decision-making from all different points around the world to bring those sculptures to a point of formation.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll have many other things to further that process.
I love remembering all those things happened. That's great.
And now I'm very interested to hear about the choice of the mirrors for exhibition purposes. But I should also ask a question from the chat. David King wants to know about the clay samples in some of Malco's later images. Please, could you tell us more about how clay or ceramic material was used in this project? Any thoughts on that?
No, do you want
clay ceramic material, is that
yes, the Hagi. Yes, I think it's very interesting to bring up the Hagi question.
Right? So if I can start a little bit. So Hagi is, it's in Yamaguchi Prefecture, but the area is very, famous for pottery making. It's very traditional area, and it has a long history, and we were very lucky to have a connection made by Keijiro, our colleague, and then we visited the pottery studio in Yamaguchi, and we met master, and then the conversation, as always, this kind of collaboration happens. First conversation, and then it sparks all sorts of ways. And then Ilana came up with idea because she realized that their material, the feldspar, it contains mica, wasn't it?
Yes, the clay body. If you don't mind if I jump in a little bit.
Thank you.
The clay body that the sensei uses, master uses in Meizengama, he mixes his own clay, and he mixes in an unusual amount of mica, and that is in order for the mica to then interact with the glaze, which is a silica-based glaze, so that in effect he's setting off or facilitating what I started to think of as micro volcanic eruptions through the surface of the glaze in the process of the firing. And because I have used and worked with the mineral mica a great deal, most recently within Mount Stewart in the creation of an expanded, we could say, next branch of the library. Each piece of mica in mineralogical terms is referred to as a book. So I've been working on an ongoing process called the library, where I've been laser etching books of mica. And mica is a silicate. And when you take a laser and you etch the surface of the mica, it melts and recrystallizes the mineral itself. So you, in effect, embed melted drawings into the surface of each book of mica. And so when our colleague was talking about working with mica within the clay body and working with a silica glaze in that process, I began to wonder, would it be possible in a very, what I learned in our first visit at St. Andrews, in a process which could be akin to the field of experimental petrology, where you're taking different materials and you're testing conditions around them. I started to wonder what would happen if a laser was to interact with the silica glaze in further, we could say, like multi-stratas underneath into the clay body with the mica, and what that relationship might do, so that you could also facilitate micro volcanic eruptions across the surface of the glaze. And so we spoke to our collaborators about whether they would be interested, actually before they became our collaborators, in looking at making a body of shared work, working with Hagi pottery, glaze, mica, and laser, to develop a new series of experimental works. And the answer was yes. And so over time, we have been working on a series of these new Hagi-ware pieces where, I don't know, it could be what I'm saying is not true and an exaggeration, but we were in some ways quite sure that it's the first time that a laser has been used in hagiware. So it's a very experimental process. And we've been working with the print studio at Dundee Contemporary Arts Print Studio, which is an extremely experimental and wonderful print studio and resource, who I've collaborated with for many years through a lot of these experimental processes and projects. And so they have been supporting our work to happen in the print studio. And actually, we're primed and ready to bring the glazed work has come back from Hagi. Naoko's husband very kindly brought the ceramic sculptural objects back to Scotland for us. And we're primed and ready to bring them through to Dundee, hopefully soon. The pandemic has made time move in a slightly different kind of way, but the works, when they're complete, will be shown in the exhibition at the Pierre Art Centre in September 2022.
And it's fascinating hearing about the ceramics, because this has infiltrated throughout your longer term, more recent practice. Well, actually, the last time I was in person with Naoko was standing in front of your newest piece, that installation in the crypt in Mount Stewart.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was terracotta used within that.
Terracotta brick objects that were then thrown into the Firth of Clyde 100 years when the brickworks closed, and then eroded for 100 years with the tides in and out each day, and then continuing my ongoing collaboration with Fontaine Petrifying and Naoko's mentioning of the term international conglomerates. The eroded terracotta bricks were then sent to the Fontaine Petrifying, where a new layer of limestone was grown over each object over the course of 3 months, and then sent back to Scotland and where I also then worked polishing some of the objects back, so you could see the kind of marrow or muscle of the brick inside of the new stone. And these objects, I think of also as international conglomerates, or kind of contemplation objects, in that they're composed of Scottish clay or Scottish brick and new French limestone. And so in effect, they're hybrid rocks that have dual nationality and that mirror these much deeper time processes that landmass has always followed, in that it is migratory and changeable and combines and travels and recombines again to form continuously new territories, and is always in process still. So as we talked quite a bit at various points about rocks being the first immigrants, landmass being ultimately the larger scale process of immigration within, or how to say that we can take lessons from land masses, from following these deep time processes as a kind of conceptual framework or model of thinking and practice for our own lives, or at least I like to think about it in that way. So even these small contemplation objects in the rock cycle mirror some of those larger deep time processes that I think are still really ethically inspirational to think about.
Yes, this relates to another question that's come into the chat actually. But before that, I just want to say that, of course, Naoko's title for her chapter is Immigrate and Meet Like a Stone, Compose Like a Poem. Compose a poem like a geologist, question and explore like an artist. So this thinking is all very present. So there's someone in the chat, let's see, in the Q&A, who is asking about Scotland. Let's see, I wonder if it's gone now. It's Joe Bowman, who is asking a question. Sorry, just let me get it up. How does living in Scotland inform your creative and curatorial practices?
Interesting.
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I saw the question and I'm thinking, should I address this? I think living in Scotland somehow, rather than Scotland, I don't know how you feel, Ilana, but somehow I feel more about Japan, or where I come from, I guess, or more of make me think about the movement of myself or other people. I think more conscious about the movement of all sorts of different things. So I feel that that's why I guess that I'm interested in weaving relationships with different things, including moving things, or as well as yourself is on move, I guess. So it's more conscious about movement, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think living here has also, I think about another project which features in felt events, and with a project that Katrina, you and I worked on very closely together in terms of minerals of New York. And I think very much that's a project that could only have developed and kind of incubated and happened and sort of distilled over a long period of time because I wasn't living in New York. And so the place of memory and the relationship to thinking about where you are from and what it means to be separated from that place and how things change over time. And to be in a place like Scotland, which is extremely outward looking and has always felt a place that's very, that is non-isolationist. And so from being anchored here, it's allowed me to think really broadly about the ways that there are these kind of interconnected veins across the surface of the earth, and also to the place that is my other home place, which was New York, and to allow for a space to try to understand those connections in a different way, or to think about the passage of rocky material going back and forth between Scotland and New York, in the same way also that people have, in the same way that my relatives did, early on, fleeing pogroms and ending up on a ship that crossed the Atlantic but was built on the Clyde. So I think it offers, by being away from your home place, a different position to reflect on what that might, what many of those things might mean.
We're slightly over time already, but just to ask a few final questions. Emily N in the chat is asking, how does feminism inform your interaction with nature? I wonder if Nauko wants to speak to that first, and then maybe Ilana.
I have to admit that I'm not knowledgeable about feminism, so I don't know how much I could answer that. But at the moment, for instance, because I'm a curator, and then the curator relates to the word care. Of course, that's how the word curator came from. And then I am in ongoing process of researching about the care ethics, which is I understand that that's also a feminist way of thinking about care, which is really complex idea of things. I don't know, feminist way to approach ethics, sorry. So that I'm still in a process to understand what is care, because the research started under the pandemic, and we very much talked about care, or what does it mean, what could that mean, I guess. And yeah, a person who is saying that I'm a curator, I thought that I should know about it. So yeah, that's my process, I guess.
And I mean, I would say definitely would situate my work within a feminist land art practice, or a queer and feminist land art practice. So practices that might be which undertake a more intimate way of engaging with place. And so these might be more discreet. They might be at times more domestically rooted, or, when I think about the piece Boiling Milk, I'm boiling milk in a geothermal pool as a way of trying to understand that phenomena, or the phenomena of geothermal activity, or as a way of trying to connect or touch or make contact with ultimately the insides of the earth. So I think there's very much a bodily approach, which is a feminist approach to making contact and relating to the land and landmass, and that happens through a much more corporeal, embodied nature of activity.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like I should bring this to a close with a sort of profound statement, but I think, like much of your work, Ilana, there needs to be a time for a process of distillation and kind of reflection. So I just want to end by asking you both a really simple question, just whether you have a favourite geological site or volcano.
Oh.
I would say Beppu. If that's geothermal, yeah. It's, I guess, that's the nearest, near to my hometown, and that's the first place our collaboration started, so it's quite special.
Yes, I agree. I mean, in terms of volcanoes, my heart is always with Eldfell, and as we both celebrated our 48th birthday just 2 days ago, so I have a lifelong ongoing relationship with Beppu, or I hope to for my whole life, and then the volcano will continue on. But in terms of geothermal love, I would say my heart is also in Beppu.
Thank you. That's a really lovely place to end then. Bloody Pond Hell.
We're in Bloody Pond Hell.
So thank you everyone for joining us tonight and for your questions in the Q&A. That's really great. I'm sorry we've not had time to ask everyone's question, but hopefully some of those questions that have been asked that haven't been answered yet will be answered in the book. So the book is out with Attractor and the MIT Press in December. I'm very happy to put a link into the Q&A so you can maybe pre-order it if you're interested in learning more. I just want to say a few thank yous. First and foremost to Ilana Halperin and Melko Magon, to Mark Pilkington and Maya Gaffney-Hyde, who are working on the book with us at Attractor. To colleagues at the University of St Andrews, to Claire Robinson, to Matthew Jarron and Lily Bartholomew of the Scottish Society for Art History, and to everyone at the Association for Art History for a wonderful start to this festival. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.